Kurt, this is unbelievable news. I'm at the lottery. San Antonio got number one. You know how I feel. How do you feel?
I think it's a great landing spot. I think it's like there's so many things we can talk about why this works for Wembayama and it works for the Spurs. I mean, the Spurs, Corey, you can talk about this. This is the perfect spot for an international player to land in a lot of ways with a franchise and a city kind of used to handling this kind of situation, right?
Yeah, I will say, though, before I would have been like, okay, this is probably one of the only places you can really land and thrive, with the exception of Dallas with Dirk. And, Dallas obviously building that with Luka. But now I'm seeing Jokic land in Denver and thrive, obviously back-to-back MVPs. And then Giannis goes and does his thing, MVP, finals MVP in Milwaukee. Now it's almost like, okay, you can basically go anywhere as long as you have time and succeed. But, I mean, for Victor Wembanyama to go to San Antonio, it's like the ideal situation because of that time factor. I mean, you look at the longest tenured coach, I think Coach Pop is number one, right? He's been there since in the 1990s. So like, that whole system will allow him to grow because he's so young.
Well, I think that's part of it is that he gets with probably the greatest developmental coach and system and team franchise in league history. And it comes without pressure. If he landed in Houston, where the owner kind of wants to flip to winning now, or if he landed in Portland next to Damian Lillard, who's on the back end, approaching the back end of his career, despite a fantastic season, there would be like hey, we got to do this now. We need you to step up now. This is a situation where how do we build this out over 3 years? Who do we bring in? Remember, they've got, I think, 9 draft picks over the next 4 or 5 years. They've got $40 million in cap space next year. So you can start to bring in a veteran who can be a locker room leader, but also bring in young talent and develop it and grow this thing somewhat organically into a real special core. And they've got they've got the hardest piece to get, right? Like they've got this potential franchise cornerstone guy. Now it's about building it out. And I think this is kind of the perfect place. And it's also French connection going back to,
Tony Parker, Boris Diaw. Like I said, this is, it's literally like written in the stars. This is something that was like, it made sense. All of us were hoping for it, right? And then it just happened, and now San Antonio, this is wonderful.
What was your phone like? What was the reaction like in the
remember, I'm in New York, and it's Fiesta back home. So it actually, like, this is a thing that apparently is like only in San Antonio. I didn't know until I left.
It is.
It's like a San Antonio-centric celebration. It's like all these crazy colors, and there's parades, and there's river floats, and it's like a month long of just partying. And this has fallen like right in Fiesta. So, this is awesome. It reminds me of when my dad got drafted. When my dad's Dave Robinson, when my dad got drafted to San Antonio and he went on his visit, he'd tell me stories about like how people were just like all these thousands of people were waiting for him at the airport, and you get to go see San Antonio in all its glory. Like, I think it's one of those scenarios where you might have people like parading with Fiesta colors, like stopping traffic on the highway, it's going to be pretty amazing. It's a big deal for the city.
It's a big deal for the city, and it's like I said, it's a big deal for the franchise, and it's a good spot for the NBA. This is a known quantity that's now probably positioned to potentially be back on top in a handful.
The greatest thing for me, Kurt, is that I actually get to watch Spurs games now, because remember it used to be like regional. I was sitting there on my phone streaming it, and now like they're actually going to be on national television again, which is going to be great for me. I can actually watch the games in New York. But one thing I thought about the draft lottery that was really fascinating, I think Portland, because there is that impending sale, right? And there is this question of like, where do we go with Damian Lillard? Like, what does that look like? So I do think that them having that top draft pick and we talked about a pretty deep draft at the top there. Yeah. This could be franchise altering because you do have some nice support pieces. You don't have to mortgage the team, anymore to try to give Damian Lillard a win now. Now the organization has some flexibility to say, look, we'll just draft and let Damian walk, which is an interesting conversation to have theoretically.
Right now, that's not the conversation they're having. If you talk to other teams around the league, the expectation though is they're going to shop the number 3 pick. They're going to re-sign Jeremy Grant. Then they'll shop the number 3 pick with some of the young stars, maybe Shaedon Sharpe, maybe Anthony Simons, to see if they can get another win now star to come in before they consider letting Lillard go, trading Lillard. It's going to be the opposite. They want to build now. And that number 3 pick where you're probably you're going to get Brandon Miller or Scoot Henderson, depending on what Charlotte does. And by the way, it's a great spot for Charlotte because now they get somebody next to Mellow Ball. So, and Brandon Miller might fit better there. Or do you go with 2 guards with Scoot? And it's an interesting discussion for them to have and see who they rate higher. But either way, you're going to have a lot of interest in that pick. And suddenly Portland's got the pieces to put together a blockbuster trade. Whether they do or not, it's Portland. We'll see. But they're interesting. And then, I think that really shakes the draft out in an interesting way because Charlotte's trying to build something. They get another key piece. Houston slides to 4. I know they're not probably thrilled with that, though.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, I tend to have, kind of weird maverick takes on a lot of NBA things. But for me, I disagree with what Portland's doing. I understand, you have a future Hall of Famer, one of the 75 greatest players of all time. But, I think that experiment's played out. And I don't think it's great. But anyways.
I think, by the way, I think they should be having that conversation internally. It's just, I think for them, added to this situation is he's the franchise talisman. He is the greatest player of all time in that organization. And it's easy on the outside to say, man, it didn't work, retool for what's next. And it's tougher to do that internally.
That's true. So let's talk Western Conference. What did you think about the game last night, Nuggets Lakers? Because there was a time when the Nuggets, they were up by 20 points several times.
It was 2 games within 1, wasn't it? There was the first 3.5 quarters where the Lakers came out lacking the defensive urgency. And I think and sometimes teams do this. I think sometimes you're playing the team you just played a little bit. You come out in the first round saying, oh, we just played these guys. We kind of don't have to play. You're still got some of those motions in your head. There's warriors they could leave open, right? If you're the Lakers, there's warriors hey, man, Jordan Poole's not hitting. We'll give him Jordan Poole. There's shooters everywhere in Denver. They move off the ball. The Lakers went small and it cost them. When the help came over, they got crushed on the offensive board. Jokic was 6 offensive boards in the first quarter. So Denver figured out what they wanted to do offensively. The Lakers, though, adjusted and figured a couple things out. I think that makes Corey, doesn't it? I'm really fascinated to see how game 2 plays out now.
Yeah, the ending of that I think is interesting. Remember when the Kings had a nice little run there on the Warriors, and they had great success in the regular season, but they had never been here. Obviously, they hadn't been in the playoff for over a decade. And then they collapsed to a team that, had that, even though Steve Kerr said this was not a championship team, they were the defending champions, and they were able to use that, that industry knowledge that we've seen play out in the Lakers, the Warriors, and the Heat, to overcome and win that series. And I'm afraid of that happening with the Denver Nuggets, where I'm okay, well, you had this game basically wrapped up by, the second quarter, going into halftime, and yet you would allow LeBron and these guys to come back and make it a little bit of run there at the end. I don't know how that bodes well for games 5 and 6 and 7, down the series, because that was concerning to me.
I think you're right on that. The Lakers they were down by a lot and weren't phased. And I was texting with somebody who covers the Nuggets full time, and he warned me. It's they take their foot off the gas, man. If they're comfortable, they're one of those teams that's oh, we got this. We're good. And they don't necessarily bring it. But the Lakers found stuff that worked. Rui Hachimura is the initial defender. I think there's ways the Nuggets could attack that. But Rui Hachimura is the initial defender, which allows Anthony Davis to roam a little more and play a little more free safety. Definitely worked. And then LeBron James, it was a masterclass. He just absolutely hunted Jamal Murray. And the Nuggets probably gave that up a little bit easy, but that matchup's not going away. They're going to have to figure something out, because if LeBron figures out something that works, Corey, he doesn't stop.
Yeah, that really, like I said, that concerns me a little bit. I also think I was watching Jokic and Anthony Davis. Obviously Jokic, he had a crazy triple-double. He almost had a triple-double in the first quarter, which is just, at halftime it was 19, 16, and 8 or something crazy. And I was thinking to myself, this is unbelievable. But the reality is, he's not a very good defender on Anthony Davis. Whereas, Anthony Davis, like, there were times when he made some incredible defensive plays. Like, we've talked about his ability defensively. I wonder what that matchup looks like. I think Jokic is playing at an MVP, obviously at an MVP level, and I thought he should have won. But I am curious, that matchup to me, as far as can Anthony Davis, take advantage of, that defensive matchup and perhaps, give you maybe a 5 or 10 point swing. I'm not talking a lot, Kurt. I'm just saying block 2 or 3 shots. And on the other end, you get him, 8 or 10 extra points there because you can take advantage of his game defensively, and that could be enough, in a 7-game series.
And I think that they realize they're going to have to throw different looks at Jokic. You can't give him a steady diet of anything, or he'll figure it out and give you real trouble. But I think they like Davis as the helper. Davis also found his footing offensively. I mean, remember, he started shooting 2 of 8 in this game, and I think missed 1 shot the rest of the way. Like, he was on fire, and he was doing it not just like, I'm going to get to the rim and dunk. How many little 12, 15-foot little floater jumpers did he knock down where, like, are you going to give me this? All right, I'll take it. Like, he was fantastic. And again, I think that game 2 is almost going to be, normally game 1's the feeling out game, but I feel like game 2 is going to tell us a lot about how these teams are going to adjust to one another, because they're going to have to tweak. They're going to have to find ways to, I don't know. After this game, my first thought was really, I looked at it, I'm like, both teams had an over 130 offensive rating. It was just an all offensive game. And like, every team figures out how to get some stops.
Exactly. Yeah, I do think the altitude, I was just in Denver a couple weeks ago. What was that, last week? Some time ago. And the moment I stepped off the plane, I was like, I was trying to it's just like, it does make a difference, right? I mean, it's just.
Did you do any training up there?
What?
Did you do any training up there?
No, I mean, I tried to run on the treadmill, and I was just like, can't forget about it. I mean, so like it does matter, and it does happen, immediately. So you think, okay, these kind of quick stays in Denver and come back. I do think that gives me an advantage, especially since game 7, if it goes there, we played in Denver, so I do think, right, it's 2-2, 1-1-1. So I do think that's an interesting advantage for Denver if it goes the distance.
If it does, I think this. Either way, I think this. Don't you feel like this is a 6 or 7 game series? Like this?
Yeah, no, it definitely feels that way. It definitely feels that way, because I do like the confidence with which Denver's playing. I do like how dominant they have been at times. I just wonder, can they close out? But I've seen them do the exact. I've seen them come back at Phoenix. There are several games in the Phoenix series where they were down 10, 20, and they were able to close out. And so I know they have it in them. But I know what the Lakers have. I've doubted LeBron enough times to know that, look, like, he can single-handedly take a team to the finals. And this is a different team. Even Jokic said it. This is a new team. And the Lakers team's good. 2
of the highest IQ teams, led by LeBron and Jokic, 2 of the highest IQ players in the league. This is going to be really smart basketball the rest of the way.
Yeah. If they play defense.
Yeah, if they play some defense.
So let's go on the other side. So Eastern Conference, we know we got Heat, Celtics. I mean, it seems like, it's crazy. How many times have these 2 teams met in the Eastern Conference Finals the past 4 years? I think it's 3.
This will be 3 out of 4.
Think about that for a second. Just like, as far as, when we always talk about the Eastern Conference, we talked about the Nets potentially being, or the 76ers. But the reality is that the Heat and the Celtics, every single time, 3 out of the past 4 years, it's like, this is unbelievable. So understanding that the Celtics just came off of a 7-game series and the Heat are kind of banged up at different times. What's your take going into game 1?
This is an interesting one, just because outside, look, the Celtics have 2 of the best 3 players, however you want to rank Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Jimmy Butler. I think that they've got more depth and better depth, frankly. But Boston eases their way into series and kind of coasts at times. They don't bring that focus. And Miami might steal game 1. Like, if I wouldn't be shocked, because they've actually won their last 2 game 1s on the road. They come out incredibly well coached. I think they've got a big coaching advantage in this series, with all due respect to Joe Mazzulla, who's probably not as bad as Twitter thinks he is. He's going up against the best coach in the league. I feel like Miami could sneak game one just by being harder and a little tighter and knowing what their plan is and executing it with their almost militaristic style while Boston kind of coasts into the series. But ultimately, I just feel, don't you, Corey, talent wins out, man, and Boston just has way more of it.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Jason Tatum can just take over games at will, even if he's playing poorly, that's what a superstar does. But Jimmy Butler has done that exact same thing all series long. And it's not like this is the first rodeo. There are times when I thought, okay, well, how good is Jimmy Butler? Is he truly a franchise player? Because, you have to look early in his career when he was with Minnesota, he was bouncing around. When he went to Miami, I was like, Then he did the bubble performance, which, that iconic picture of him hanging over the side, nothing left. I was like, this guy is crazy. Then this past season, last season, I was just like, Jimmy Butler is doing like 40-point triple-double type of performances. Like, what is going on? Over and over and over consistently. And then this season, I was like, there's just no way this team could even get in the, they just look so bad. And he's willed them to this moment. That is going to be the coolest thing ever. Like, you think about basketball, Kobe Bryant on, whoever. I want their best defender. Tatum, Butler.
Yeah.
Like, that is going to be epic.
Yeah. And the Heat asked Butler to do it. They've got to choose whether he's on Tatum or Brown.
Which is tough, but yeah, you go Tatum.
Yeah, and I think it might switch depending on who's hot. But that's just what they ask him. They're like, hey, carry the offense on this end. And then, by the way, guard their best guy on the other end. It's a lot. And what's going to be interesting, the Heat last year, they got such a balance. Jimmy Butler was averaging 25 and change a game, carrying the offense. You got 15 a game from Bam. They're going to get 15 to 18 a game from Bam. But after that, there were like 5 guys who had 7 to 9 points a game. Max Strus, Gabe Vincent had nights. But the thing is, 2 of them were Victor Oladipo, who was their third leading scorer, and Tyler Hero, who, according to Eric Spoelstra, they wouldn't rule him out because they're the Heat, but he also said he hasn't dribbled the ball or shot a ball yet, which is a sign. I don't know that he's back that soon from that hand injury. I just think I feel like the depth ultimately catches up with them. With all due respect to, look, they'll have a good Max Strus game. I just don't know that they can play. They've been able to play Duncan Robinson and Kevin Love minutes and not get exploited by that yet. And I think Boston's the team, just because they're 5 deep and really 8 deep. They'll just take it to those guys. Like they'll expose the defensive weaknesses of those guys where that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah. I think with the Celtics, they're my biggest question with them is just, why do you need to be on the ropes to perform well? And that's like, I don't know why you need to get to game 7 every time. I don't know why Jason Tatum needs to pull out a 50-point performance consistently out of his bag. Like, why make it that hard? So I think eventually that's one of my issues with, okay, well, are they a championship team? Because but then at the same time too, championship teams find a way to win. Period. So it's kind of like that's why it's like, so I'm with you in the sense of like, okay, I know what they have. I know they have the depth, but if they're sleeping, the Heat might steal a couple, and it might be enough. So that's my thought process on the series, where I'm like, well, how much can the Heat steal? How much can the Heat steal?
I think that's a really good question, and honestly, it gets interesting if they take the first one, or they can get, and then they go home. Let's say they get 2 out of the first 3. Now the Celtics backs are up against the wall, and what Celtics do we see? Do they really finally kind of find their focus and come out? Because that's not like off the table for me. I just absolutely believe Miami will come out with not only focus, but they will throw a couple things at Joe Mazzulla he wasn't expecting. And how he hasn't, he eventually went last series. He finally went to the 2 big lineup, but all the reporting out of Boston is that really wasn't his idea. It was kind of the overwhelming consensus of other assistant coaches was like, dude, you got to do this. Stop messing around. And he's shown some rookie coach moments, keeping timeouts in his pocket that he can't do now.
Cannot.
I know. You know what? We haven't talked enough about the Spurs and Wembanyama, man. Let's get to Corey's Jukebox. We've got to have more Spurs Wembanyama talk.
Yeah, I was looking at Vicente Fernandez. I don't know if you listen to him. He's a very good musician. But I was thinking, okay, well, I gotta bring some mariachi. I gotta do something, But I couldn't find a mariachi song that I liked enough to put that fit this moment. So I went to some Cuban music. I want to do Fiesta de la Rumba by Afro-Cuban All-Stars, great band. And for me, this moment, like I said, it's fiesta and it's a fiesta. But there is this question of, okay, well, what should the expectation be? Because this was a thing where it was almost like you don't even want to talk about it, Kurt. Like I was afraid. There were times when you asked me about this leading. I was like, I don't even want to jinx it. So now that like last time, I think last week you asked me, and I was like, heart be still. Like I don't know. I don't even want to let my mind go there. And then I said, okay, well now it's a thing. It's a real thing. Like let's think about expectation setting. The guy's like 18, 19, right?
Yeah, 19. Yeah.
And he's 7'5". Remember when Giannis came to the league and he was thin as a rail?
Yeah.
And then it took him like 6 years or so to put on some weight. And then 7, 8, 9 is when the MVP seasons and the championship came, right? Like, so I'm thinking, okay, even like, even my dad, right? That he came in 87 was when he drafted, rookie year 89. First championship came with Tim Duncan in 99, right? So I think expectation setting realistically 8 to 10 years is not like a bad idea as far as like, when a championship could come, given, his body type and his age and, and just where the team is right now. So leading into that, I'm thinking, well, what do the next 8 years look like? Is it going to be like a party right off the bat? We're going to, become a playoff team after winning 20 something games, like the first 2 times with David Robinson and Tim Duncan, right? I don't know. But either way, it's a cautious fiesta. This is one of those, we're pacing ourselves. It's like we're going to be here for the next 8 years, So that's kind of the party vibe that I want to do, not an all-out New Year's Eve thing. This is a paced fiesta, a pace party.
First off, I love the International Afro-Cuban All-Stars. Like that.
Yeah, great music.
Fun, great band. But I think you're right. Look, we were just talking about this before we came on. LeBron's rookie year, 35 wins. Your dad's rookie year was what? What did you say it was?
30? I think it's 35 or 36.
Yeah. I think that's kind of a reasonable expectation, and you build up. The advantage of the current NBA financial structure is you've got him for at least 7 years, probably 8 or 9, right? Like before he can start to, if not that we're going to go there, but like if he's trying to push his way out, that's probably when it happens. You've got time. You've got time to build, like they did around Giannis. We're like, hey, we've got to go get Chris Middleton, and we may have to bring in Drew Holiday, but it took time. And you're right, it's going to take time for his body to round out and fill out. Rudy Gobert, another French player. I mean, Rudy didn't play as much those first couple of years. They worked hard on getting his core and his legs and his base strong so that he could be the guy who was, 3-time defensive player of the year. I think that there's some of that with Wembanyama, isn't there?
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Kurt's corner. So this is something I wanted to ask you about. Doc Rivers, 3 years in Philadelphia, and he's out. This is something that coaches have been lamenting publicly because, some shocking firings from my perspective. If you love basketball and if you're thinking about expectation setting, you're like, the winningest coaches in recent years have been fired. Bud in Milwaukee, Monty Williams, they were the 2 winningest coaches, and they brought their teams to a championship and a final series, and one coach of the year during this tenure wasn't good enough. And then it's like Doc Rivers, he takes you to the Eastern Conference semis, and with all the different, Ben Simmons got out, James Harden comes in, all this movement, and he's out after 3 years. What was your take on this firing?
I really wasn't that surprised for a couple of reasons, but you touched on the big one, which is I think what gets not Monty Williams so much, although a little, but that was an ownership change. And I heard from somebody not long after the ownership changed who said Monty Williams could be in trouble. I'm like, yeah, no way. He's going to talk to Monty Williams. Everybody loves Monty Williams. No way. That guy was right. Like that was an ownership decision, but Budenholzer and Doc Rivers are victims of the expectation game, right? The second round, even if the 3rd best record in the NBA, losing to the 2nd best record in the NBA in the second round isn't good enough. right? It was not enough. They wanted to go further. Also, if they want to bring back, James Harden seemed to push back on this a little bit online, but there had been rumors that if he was coming back, Doc wouldn't be the coach. Like that wasn't necessarily a relationship that was working as well as they'd hoped. But I think that mostly it's just same with Budenholzer. And I don't know that that's fair, but it's the expectations are in a championship or bust world where it's, I mean, you and I have lamented this before, the rings culture. Isn't there a sense that like, all right, you haven't been getting us close enough for a couple of years. You're out, even though you, in Budenholzer's case, won one a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, Frank Vogel won and then got fired. Yep. I mean, it was just, so this is something that I think is interesting about the NBA, where it's like, you know, I understand the coaching profession. There's no stability generally. So I get that, you know, in college, you see more 20, 30, 40 year positions, you know, in the NBA, I think Mike Malone, you know, he got hired in the early 2010s and he's like the fourth longest tenured, right? But it's Spoelstra, Pop is number one, Spoelstra is number two, right? And
Malone might be third. He's at like 8 years. There might be somebody else in there. I'm getting off.
Yes, but it's like, but you know, it's just uncommon. And Steve Kerr.
That's
And but I mean, it's just uncommon. But what have you noticed about, you know, those kind of franchises that, well, I mean, you raise MVPs, like you know, it's like it's a culture that raises MVPs and wins championships, but it takes 20 years or 10 years. And the reality is the way that these sales are happening, like, you know, it's not like people are buying teams in 1978 anymore and holding them till 2021. You know, like that's not how sports team ownership works. Now it's like fractional groups coming, like almost like PE firms coming in and saying, this looks like a great investment. We hold it for 4 years and sell it to someone else for a record, you know, and we're going to have a portfolio of sports teams. So you're not only, you're going to just do this one, it's going to be Premier League and NFL and whatever. And then that way, it doesn't matter if we sell this one on time in 4 or 5 years. So like that kind of approach to team ownership brings this championship ring culture where you win one, but it's not good enough. We need another one, or so I don't like that direction.
Yeah, and that ties back into franchise value, right? Like, hey, we're only getting to the second round. Is your franchise less valuable than if it won a ring? I don't know the finances of that kind of stuff, but like, I think that you're right on. I think that there is just a pressure now to win. Maybe it's a social media world to a degree.
That's a good point.
Where there's just a pressure from fan bases. There used to be. Bill Simmons used to have a line that like, you win a championship, you should get 5 years of like whatever, like you should just be happy for 5 years. That's just not the case anymore, and it's going to be interesting to see where some of these guys can, because I think there's a bit of musical chairs going on here, right? Like,
and that's the other part that I think you're seeing more people willing to pull the trigger, because the reality is there's just such an amazing. If you wanted to get a Doc Rivers, you might have to wait 8 years, you know.
No.
So that's kind of one thing where I started thinking about, I'm like, I can't believe everyone's getting fired. But after Coach Bud got fired, Coach Budenholzer, then I was like, okay, now I could understand. Because remember before, Quinn Snyder was like the one coach everyone was like, oh, Quinn Snyder, like, you know, he's available. But it was like he had his kind of like the pick of the litter kind of thing. Now it's like if you're a coach and if you're a team and you really want an excellent like future Hall of Fame or a Coach of the Year type of coach, you know, you have a couple of options now. Like you can actually court several coaches who are available for the first time. So I do think now is the time, if you are going to fire a coach, to get in the game and try to grab one that you could hopefully, you know, hold on to for the next 8+ years.
And is that where Philadelphia is at a little bit? Don't you think? Like,
yeah, because they had the process.
Monty Williams, right? Like they're going to bring in a new voice, but somebody who's done it before. You might get the same thing in Milwaukee. I think you can. Phoenix, again, because of the ownership situation, is a little harder to predict. But again, I don't think if you've got Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and however you're shaping the roster around them, with DeAndre Ayton almost certainly gone, Chris Paul possibly gone, and you know, if you can trade DeAndre Ayton to a team, I know I've heard speculation on the Clippers. The Clippers are an easy one to speculate on because they've got a lot of like mid-level contracts. But if you could trade Ayton's $30 million for two $15 million guys and give yourself depth, like that looks really good.
And the other thing too,
but you're not going to turn that team over to a rookie coach, are you?
Well, I mean, in the NBA recently, it's like you get turn it over to Ime Udoka and he gets you to the finals. You turn it over to Frank Vogel in a rookie year, and he wins a championship. So, and Joe Mazzulla has a chance to go back in his first year, go to the finals. So I do think that there is this kind of like idea where it's almost like a hey, it happened for them. Why can't it happen for us? We bring someone in, new culture, and we have a great first season. I mean, it happened in Atlanta too. They got pretty far in the Eastern Conference. So it's kind of like an interesting viewpoint, but it kind of like I think goes down after the first season, which is why you're seeing the turnover. And also, I think you're having a combatant kind of posture, conflict. Thank you, between the way coaches think and the way the new owners think, right? Yeah. Because like coaches are like, I've been doing, they're lifers, coaches, like they're like like they're basketball people. They're like, I've devoted my life to this game. I've given my family to this game. Like, this is everything for me. And I can watch film for 20 hours a day. Right. And then you have like these owners who come in who are more like fans or like finance people or tech people who don't necessarily understand the game at that level or respect the game at that level. And it's like, I think there's a big thing where it's like, let the basketball people do the basketball thing. Like, I don't need you telling me to trade this guy. Like, you don't understand basketball. Like, that's the GM's job, like don't call me about this person should play more minutes. Like, I've been coaching for 30 years and I've won a championship, like the franchise play. I know how to do load management, So I do think that is like this over the owner who wants to be involved, I think, are trying to find coaches who are more amenable to being a part of that collaborative process, which I think is, I don't know if that's good for basketball, considering, I don't know.
But I think that also hits the front offices very hard. There's not a lot of Spurs-like organizations where that wall exists anymore, right? Like by the way, what do you think about Mike D'Antoni?
So this is one thing I was like, is like out of nowhere on a white horse, like because remember a couple of years ago, we're like, oh, like what's going to happen? And like the Indiana thing, like I wonder, and then I kind of just forgot, that all these coaching vacancies, and it's like, wow, like that could actually really work, wouldn't it?
That would be kind of wild. I don't know if he's a great fit with Embiid, but having him back in Phoenix would be really entertaining. I can't imagine that that's what's going to happen, but that's a team with Durant and Booker where if you put the right pieces around them and told them to play fast.
I mean, you're going to set some records. Okay, so let's turn to a different note here. Ja Morant back in trouble. There was a Instagram live video where it appeared to be that he was flashing a gun briefly. We understand that he did that public apology tour, sat down, had the, I'm sorry interview, expressed remorse, talked to Adam Silver. Adam Silver was lenient on him, only 8-game suspension without pay, allowed him to come back and play in the playoffs, right? I didn't know if that was going to be a thing or not. And then it was a thing. And now the Memphis Grizzlies, after that early exit, we see this in the offseason. And the team, the Grizzlies, once again took the first initiative, suspended Ja Morant from all team activities, and now we're waiting to see what the league thinks. And what's your take on all of this?
Yeah, it's by the way, it's easy to suspend a guy right now indefinitely because there are no team activities. Like he's not missing out on anything. Adams, and by the way, Ja Morant issued another apology statement yesterday that sounded a lot like the first apology statement. But I think if you saw just before the lottery, you may have blacked out and not remember this. But Malika Andrews did a really good job kind of pressing Adam Silver on this a little bit. And Silver's was honest. He's like, I'm disappointed. And I think that's part of it. On top of the image issues and everything else, this was a situation where he was kind of, like you said, was kind of lenient because he's a young kid. He made a mistake. He learned. And there was a sense of like, let's give him another chance. They gave him another chance, and the same thing happens. Now, I think you're going to see the league. I mean, the sense talking to people around the league is that they're coming down hard. Like,
yeah, you would have to.
Yeah.
Like the last time this, like, Gilbert Arenas brought, the 4 guns into the locker room. And remember, he joked about it on Twitter after expressing a remorse thing. And then David Stern suspended him indefinitely without pay. It ended up being a year. And then after that, though, you look at his career, and it basically was, he didn't have much. I think only a couple of years left in the league, and he was out. So I mean, this is it would be a very strong statement for the league to suspend someone like Ja Morant indefinitely or for a year, but without pay. What's your take on the length of suspension?
It's hard to guess. My guess is I was going to say 20 games or more. I think 20 is the low end, which is a quarter of the season. By the way, his new $194 million contract kicks in.
Yep.
This is part of what kind of surprises you. Like the 8-game suspension cost him like $669,000. But Nike had to be in his ear. Like they I don't want to say it wasn't like some quiet soft release of his signature shoe, but it didn't get quite the fanfare that had happened with others' first signature shoes. Powerade pulled back their ads and kind of didn't release. Powerade was going to do a whole thing around him at the March Madness. It kind of slid in during the playoffs, but it didn't get the same push. You would think, and then not making All NBA, which
cost him like $30 million, and that's
$39 million, yeah. And that, look, I mean, I didn't really have to factor that in too much, but I'll just say that when I put together that list for my 6 top guards and I had 12 guys on it who I thought were deserving, suddenly you are splitting hairs, and missing 8 games for your team and kind of throwing them off balance absolutely impacted your play on the court. It wasn't just an off the court thing. It impacted your team on the court. So you would think that all of that would have, losing all that money would have shaken a certain level of like, all right, I gotta pull this together, at least in my public facing situations. And here we are. So I think he's going to, I'm expecting 20 games, and that hurts the Grizzlies next year, who are
Jaren Jackson Jr. just got Defensive Player of the Year, finished second in the West.
Yeah.
I mean, they were really moving forward. You know, it is interesting though, the way, especially the Grizzlies, remember after Dylan Brooks, he had the huge article, like, I want to be like, everyone's kind of like, I don't want friends in the NBA. I want to be like a villain and kind of relish that role of, and then he had the whole back and forth with LeBron. And then when it's like, okay, well, is he going to come back to Memphis? And Taylor Jenkins and the organization was like, no, very clear. Like we're done with those kind of antics. We want to focus. We don't want the distractions. And then this happens. So I think from like a team standpoint too, you got to ask yourself, okay, well, what are we going to do? What's our conversation with our franchise player? Because, vocally we're saying this and we're not going to bring Dylan Brooks back. But then what do we do with John Morant when he's the one who keeps putting himself in these positions? Yeah. That's really hard. And then from the league standpoint too, you think, okay, well, there's such a strong stance on gun violence. And like, how many times have we seen press conferences being used to bring attention to these things, and coaches, players, everyone. And then one of the top, athletes, has kind of been reckless with firearms. That also isn't great for the league's perspective as far as, the hypocrisy that's right there.
No, and this is as this is an image issue that has been a concern around the league, and it's not. And by the way, he didn't break any laws, and we should be clear that what he's done isn't illegal. It's an image thing, but it's an image issue that deeply concerns the NBA going back decades.
Decades and decades. This is like So the thing that I think is really fascinating too, when you think about the other team's abilities, to like, okay, so actually before we get there, I want to bring this is my take on how Adam Silver is approaching this, right?
Okay, I'd be curious.
Yeah, because I think that Adam Silver's a lawyer.
Yeah.
And I think he's a very cautious person when it comes to precedent. I think he understands the weight of precedent. Just, so I think when he thinks about issuing a ruling or a verdict, just from like looking at the past, like you remember the whole Robert Sarver sale, for instance, like he issued a judgment that I thought was lenient, but it was in line with past precedent, that $10 million fine, no team activity, right? Instead of banning him or forcing a sale, right? But then what happened? The environment forced the sale. Like the other team owners didn't want to do it. We didn't want to work with them. And then like the sponsors are pulling out. So the league didn't do something. They didn't overstep their authority and trusted that, the environment would then force the sale. And then Robert Sarver was, forced out. But the future generations can't go back and say, well, this happened. This person said this or did this kind of workplace. There is precedent to force a sale, right? So I think that Adam Silver is probably thinking through this very carefully in John Morant's case, because if he sets a precedent that's too strict in the future, I think it's going to be like it's not wide enough. It's going to be too narrow of a ruling that's too confining. Because think about what he shepherded the NBA through, Kurt. Like with COVID, you do one thing, next month it's irrelevant. So, I do think there is that element of like, we want a ruling that is fair but flexible, and then allow the environment, the Grizzlies and the sponsors and, Powerade, et cetera, and Nike to then punish him monetarily with like economic sanctions.
Yeah, I think there is something to that. You're right that he's cautious. He's also a consensus builder, and I think that this is something he will work on more behind the scenes than dramatic public statements type of thing. Yeah. He's not David Stern that way.
But different leagues. It's like that was growing the NBA, building a brand. Now you have an internationally recognized brand. How do you shepherd that? And I think that's why the more cautious, flexible, and fair approach probably suits this NBA better. That's so star driven. But so that's my take on it. So last but not least,
I think that's just his nature, right? He's just more cautious as a person.
And last but not least, Mad Libs. This is a segment that our producer Dan likes to throw at us, something out of left field. So this is the one. Who is your favorite hero, favorite villain of all time?
It's funny. I'm curious where you're going to go with this. I'm personally, with all due respect to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and whatever other heroes you want to throw out, I think any story, whether it's Bond or any kind of thing like that, is driven more by the villain. Like, I'm more interested in the villain because the great villain makes the hero have to go beyond themselves, right? And to me, still, the greatest villain and maybe the greatest symbiotic villain-hero relationship ever is the Joker. Crafty, smart, but also evil for the sake of being evil. Just kind of a crazy evil that's a little harder to deal with than, the best villains have, even your Thanos. There's a backstory. There's a reason he's doing the things he's doing, even if it's genocidal in that case. And Joker's just nuts. I want to use a bat reference there, but I'm not going to use those words. But he's crazy. He's that kind of crazy, and I'm drawn to that kind of character who is crafty and smart, but also just diabolical. What about you, Corey? Where did you go with this?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I think I'll start with villain. I think my favorite villain is Medea. I don't know if she's a villain though, but I guess she is. Yeah, but she, I think that's a really interesting kind of story. I think Medea is a fascinating villain because I think, I understand what you're saying about Joker, but I also think that a villain, one of the hard parts about a villain is that the icky feeling you feel, because you can't just dehumanize them. It's that icky feeling that, like, I could understand you or identify with you at certain points because you are human, like she gave up everything for Jason, who then betrayed her, and he's the father of her two sons, and like he lied to her. So you do understand that betrayal, but you don't understand why would you take it to that level, right? But there is that element of like humanity there, which makes like the ability to shut off that humanity even more terrifying, because it's like, that's crazy what you did, and like you hate him that much. That's kind of like, so I think Medea is a great villain because of those reasons. She's very complex, and she's also, I think, a goddess, right? Which I think is even more interesting as far as like the villain dynamic, the goddess human kind of relationship, and being outsmarted by a human, but then also like taking revenge on the. It's very complex. Then the other one, I think, with hero, I'm gonna go with Beowulf. I think Beowulf, it's one of my favorite epic poems, and Beowulf, I think, is just like, I think like a knight's knight, like, like a hero's hero, like a warrior's warrior, like the dude just like, hey, I hear you have a demon that like no one can kill, like I'm your guy. Everyone else is like shaking in their boots, and he's like, yeah, I'll go do it. And also he's very flawed too, and I think
that's part of the beauty of that story is that I don't love. It's frankly, and you've heard writers talk about this. It's hard to write Superman because what do you do with the invincible, perfect guy? Like, where's the fun part? Like, that's why I'm more drawn. Beowulf's a great example, or again, a Batman Joker. Where everybody's flawed, man. Nobody's perfect. I don't want a perfect person.
Yeah, exactly. The imperfection, and I think it's funny because, like, I remember growing up in Texas, someone said, like, if your pastor doesn't have a limp, like, don't trust him. And I do think that's true. Like, if you're going to be a hero, like, you do have to have some sort of like flaw, which is why, like, you're trying to help. You're not a god. You're
Yeah.
like a person who has failed, but you're trying to do the best with what you've been given, kind of thing. So I think they'd be my picks.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's actually the beauty of Greek mythology, isn't it? They are gods, but they've got all the human frailties.
Well, Kurt, from Beowulf to DeAndre Ayton, Doc Rivers, yeah, we always have very circuitous conversations. I'm excited for next week because we're going to have more to talk about, and I'm sure the way that the league is going, we're going to have like 5 new breaking stories.
Yes, exactly.
So I'll see you then.
I look forward to it.